All right, everybody, this is Ross the Fig Boss, and what you guys are looking at right now is a fig tree that's inside my greenhouse. It's a potted tree, and it has taken some damage from a very cold night that we had here in the Philadelphia area, as a lot of us did in the Northeast, and a lot of us who grow fruit, we've been very worried about our fruit trees, especially the stone fruits, the apricots, the plums, the pluots, the peaches, as a lot of them have bloomed at a very early date this year, and we've had a pretty abrupt late frost or very hard, very low temperature that came in here for a few nights in a row. And the figs, unfortunately, even here in the greenhouse, got hit by that particular cold. And we got down to the low 20s. I'm not exactly sure what the temperature was, but since this particular branch and a number of branches I'm going to show you guys in here got hit by this frost, or this very low temperature in the low 20s, a lot of this now has taken damage. You can see the leaves are now crispy and look very sad. Even the fig here, this Baraba, looks very sad. Here's another branch actually on a different tree, and this particular branch has taken some damage, but not the entire new growth has taken damage. In fact, there's even a small fig that looks like it wants to form right there. But a lot of this up here is very likely dead. And, it's even hard to kind of break this off, but that's likely dead. Maybe this will start to leaf out right there, or maybe even right there. But what is very likely for most of the trees, or most people in this situation, is that the trees will just go on as normal business and leaf out at a lower height with whatever has the most apical dominance, whatever is the highest bud here on the tree that isn't damaged, that is viable. And maybe even actually if you had a situation where there was no viable buds, maybe the tree would then send up a sucker from the roots and continue growing. So in a lot of situations, this is unfortunate. There's a huge downside that we're going to talk about. But in a lot of situations, your trees will just not die. In fact, they'll be totally fine. This is obviously not ideal, but unless your tree is, very young and very small and doesn't have a whole lot of buds on it, doesn't have a whole lot of energy, it wasn't a healthy tree to begin with, there's a very high chance that your tree is then going to leaf out, and my trees will very soon leaf out in the next week or two, especially assuming we have warmer temperatures in the soil level. So what I've done, in fact, what you'll notice here actually is a lot of the greenhouse looks totally fine. In fact, what had happened was, I want to just briefly mention, is that this heater that we have down here that warms this greenhouse up at night, because this greenhouse is not very insulative. You need a heat source, right? If it's 20 degrees outside, it's very likely going to be 22 or, somewhere around that. It's not going to be much warmer than outside. So you need some kind of heat source. The heat very quickly dissipates and you lose that through the ceiling. There's a lot of cracks in here. These panels are not very insulative. They're very thin. So you got to have some kind of heat source if you're going to be doing this. And unfortunately, my heater we had a circuit breaker problem in the house. I didn't realize it. And the circuit breaker that connects to this heater actually got flipped off, and this heater never went on at night. So that's really the problem. And I would still highly recommend for anyone that's, doing this. This is really the only problem I've ever had, and this probably will be the only problem you ever have. If for whatever reason your heater just fails to kick on, and of course you have, it always happens usually on the coldest night. But a lot of the greenhouse here is still good. I think a lot of the heat was still trapped, especially here in this midsection. As the heat rises, a lot of the heat is of course still here, but as you go to the top, these panels obviously don't do a good job of insulating, and a lot of that heat is escaping very quickly from the point in which the heat hits the cold of these panels. So, this branch here, as an example, just got toasted. And of course, heat rises, so the trees actually down here at my feet, where it's much colder, also got hit. And I've noticed, believe it or not, that it was on a lot of the trees that are just kind of leafed out and didn't have many leaves on them. The trees like down here that have many leaves and even have figs on them were totally fine. whereas the branch right next to it is just like destroyed. Same thing over here with similar situation. And these are different trees, different varieties. So maybe the variety has actually a part and plays a part in this. But I mean, look, these branches are totally leafed out, and then look at that. It's just like, wow. So I don't know if it's physiology. Oh God, if it's part of the process here of the tree, as to whether or not this whole thing is going to be okay or not, or if it's actually some part of the genetics that are saying, hey, I can actually withstand a little bit of colder temperatures after I've already leafed out. But regardless, this is not what you want to do, because here's my reasoning, right? And this is why I've been telling you guys, if you have potted trees and you're seeing these frosts come in, get them away from that. Put them in. There's no real benefit unless you had such a crazy environment like we have here, where they're really off to the races. I mean, the bravas are getting quite large. We even have main crop that's forming in here. It's just amazing how much of a head start and what that can do for the quality of the fruits, the ripening date of the fruits, and even the quantity of fruits in the length of your season. It's quite spectacular having this kind of head start. But if you're going to then have this process where you're going to get these trees damaged like this, in any sense, greenhouse or not, maybe you had this whole process in a potted tree that was just outside and was just starting to wake up, and you left it out there, and you didn't realize that this 20-degree low or 25-degree low was going to do something. Well, here's the mistake, because now we're losing these leaves, we're losing photosynthesis. We're also losing potentially even the growth tips, and these growth tips may die. When we lose these tips, we're then losing a lot of the growth that's going to continue to grow very strongly. We're changing kind of the whole process of the fig, because the figs form on this new growth. Right in here, by the way, are two little dots that represent a new branch, and one represents a new fig. So you can see that right there, these two little dots right in there. One is a fig, one is a new branch. So if this tip here dies, then this new branch is now going to get activated. It's going to have dominance, and the tree is now going to revert to this and start growing from here. But we also just have figs that are forming there. So if we want to have fruit, unlike a lot of the other fruit trees that you can grow, you got to protect this growth. This growth is the key to producing a good harvest. So if you got something like this where a lot of this is dead, and then we're then having to a lot of this is going to be dead, and then we're going to have to leaf out from like here or somewhere lower down on the tree, well, that's going to set the tree way back in terms of the production. As I said, we're going to have less production. We're going to ripen our figs at a later date, and the quality is probably going to be lower because we're then ripening them at a later date in the season. So this is just worst case scenario what would happen. And of course, might as well try everything once, right? Especially if you want to learn, make the mistakes. Unfortunately, fortunately, I should say, this is a mistake that isn't actually that bad. On a few of these trees, yeah, they're not looking good, but this is a mistake you kind of want to make and see what the results are, because you learn from that. You always get better from your mistakes, but that's at least what you should be doing. Now, from the trees that did get hit by this frost, what can we do? Because some of this, the trees, like I said, we're not only are we losing out on our harvest, but we're losing actually out on some of these buds, and we're actually kind of ruining the form of our trees. And that if so many of these buds along this branch, let's say, leafed out, and we lost all that growth, those buds on those branches, we're going to have to leaf out from quite a low point, and we're going to have to go back, in a sense, to a form that's just not as ideal, right? We want to have this open spreading habit to get as much light as possible, right? Keeping these branches away from each other as much as we can. Getting that and capturing and maximizing that light for photosynthesis. So we're losing out on the form. We're also potentially killing our trees, right? As some of these trees, as I said, it's unlikely, but it is possible for some of these trees to die, especially if they're not as established as most of these trees in here are They've been growing from cutting for at least a year or two or more, and these trees will be totally fine leafing out from a lower height. But I do have a tree actually in the back. A couple trees in here are grafted. Like this one here is Hatib de Argentile that we grafted. Fortunately, the growth is thick enough here that we're not going to see a problem. In that, yeah, the leaves are toast, but the actual branch itself is fine. We'll leaf out from those points. We also have plenty of wood here above the graft that will leaf out if indeed we need to. But even back here in this really small, see these gray thin branches back here? This tree is very young and not well established, and it's got 2 graft unions on it of 2 different varieties, and this is just not doing well. This green growth is likely very dead. I don't even know what's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to leaf out. So in a sense, we may, in that way, actually lose the variety. We won't kill the tree totally, but certainly the varieties that we want are not good. So it's always good to take precautions. In fact, what I did when we came in here not too long ago, we talked about a video actually where we saw a 6-degree low outside, and I did not turn the heater on at night. Again, another mistake. And I would argue probably we saw about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even more, in this greenhouse. And so the potted trees in here, historically, if you get them below 14, that's the lowest I've ever gone, was 14. But if you take damage at the root level, that's not good, and you can kill a lot of your trees that way. So 6 degrees or 10 degrees, I was very worried about these trees, and I came in here the following day and I took a bunch of cuttings, especially on the varieties I could not replace. And actually the one that we just looked at, the tree that I thought we would we potentially have killed after this latest mistake, is I took this particular branch here, this particular cutting. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to be grafting this. And then I have another tree here. This one here has not really done well for me. It doesn't put out a lot of fruit. It's a bit finicky. It needs a lot of light. And not only does it need a lot of light, but the fruits have dropped for 2 years in a row. So I'm not too happy with this particular variety. What I will do is still let this particular branch here, I'm going to let this continue to grow. This one actually is forming fruits right here. It seems to be getting the right amount of light that it needs, at least for now. We'll see if it holds on to its fruit later in the season, but the rest of these branches, it is the biggest and largest tree as well in this greenhouse. But for most of these branches, I will actually cut them back and graft onto them. So that's what we did right here, as this particular cutting was taken. And this is very viable. There's nothing wrong with this growth. I could very easily take that as a cutting and root that. This here was the top of that particular cutting. So this stuff here is dead and damaged. Maybe we could have leafed out at some point here and we would have been fine. But just cutting this off and then trying to root this, there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, even just cutting off some of this new growth if you wanted and having it leaf out from anywhere along this branch, you should see some good success doing that. But instead, I think I'd rather just graft some varieties onto it. Why not take this opportunity? I've already kind of ruined the crop on these particular branches that we mentioned, that we looked at. Why not just cut them back and try to graft something else onto it? To me, that seems to make more sense. So that's what we're going to do today. I got my rubber bands, I got my grafting tape, I got the scions that we're going to use, I got my pruning shears, my grafting knife, and that's one creative way to kind of salvage this whole process. It's always good to have backup, especially if you guys are living in these colder places, colder climates, backup trees, backup cuttings, backup of whatever it is I've learned over the years. It's just really important, and inevitably something just goes wrong living in a place where you really shouldn't be growing figs. So that's it. That's the extent of the damage. Those are the downsides. That's kind of what we're missing out on. That's kind of what you guys should expect in the next couple weeks. I would imagine a lot of these trees start leafing out at lower portions here along the branch. The trees will make a recovery, but we lost out on the harvest. We lost out on the ripening dates. We lost out probably even on the fruit quality. So it's unfortunate. for these set of trees that I really wanted to see a lot of these in here that I put in here for a very specific reason, to guarantee myself a very good crop, and I'm just now shooting myself in the foot in a way with what has happened. So again, you know, it is what it is. Not the end of the world, but that's kind of what you would expect, and what you guys can expect with your figs after a very low temperature, or even a frost that might come in. That's later in the season. All right, guys, we'll keep you up to date here on the greenhouse. I want to talk more about Bravas and the main crop that's forming. We'll see you guys for the next one, all right? Take care.